time. Now, today we will be going through Genesis chapter 2. This is really packed. It's a short chapter of the Bible in Genesis, but it is really filled with a lot of gems, a lot of things that will just, if you understand them, if you get the revelation about what it means, then you really up to something. So without further ado, we're gonna go into this now. Genesis chapter 2. Of course, it starts with the first Sabbath. Before I do that, I have to again show the version of the King James Bible that I am using. This is uncommon. It's really something. The content, I mean, it's similar in certain parts, but there is more. There's just more to it. Here it is. So this is the Holy Bible, and it's the King James Version, the old one. It's a gem. This is a treasure. I sometimes feel like my journey to North America was to find this exact book. And anyway, so it starts with the first Sabbath. That is when God rested on the seventh day. And for all purposes, we realize that this is not a literal, it's not literally 7 days in which God created all this. It's symbolism, and it represents many. Usually the number seven, or a repetition of the number seven, means many. 77, you must forgive, and this kind of things is just to say many. And we will not depart from that. And it starts there with a single seven, right? So not to be really hang on that and dwell on that. Now, on verse 5, there is an interesting thing that happens there. And it says, and every plant of the field before it was in the earth, and every herb of the field before it grew. For the Lord God had not caused it to rain upon the earth, and there was no man, not a man, to tip the ground. This is very important. So it says that it did not rain because God had not created a man to work the ground. And you can see here that there is a purpose that is attached to a man. What he is supposed to do as a creation is really what God intended for him to be, or for the earth to be created. And what is interesting about this is when you think about it, it's you can think about it in this way. The structures to take care of the earth was not in place, so God did not make it rain upon the earth to multiply what was there already. So you can push it a little bit further and say that the blessings that you get in life are dependent on the structures that you put in place to be a recipient of those blessings. Because oftentimes we just get stuck on the fact that things are not going our way, and we forget to look at the structures that we have in place in our personal lives, or in business, or in relationships, that will make sure that the blessing, the multiplication of what we have, or what we are asking, what we are aspiring to have, those structures are not put in place. And this is really important because it is linked also to the purpose, the intent of something. We already talked about the intent, why, how it was very important. And it was likely that it's not that the word started, but it's a vision and an intent for something that starts in the creation, in the creative process, as we saw. So that really there is a very profound lesson that we can get from chapter 2. And it goes on and it says, and the Lord now formed, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. This is also very, very packed because we're talking about potentially one, the, you would say, creation of, say, evolution, and you will get it, but also life. God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. What does life mean? Usually, when people, I would say, are pronounced dead, we rush to see if they're breathing. But that's not really the definition of life. In the medical term, you look at the consciousness of the person because animals breathe too, but they have a different kind of life. And their consciousness is at a different frequency, so to speak, and can download less. So life really is about consciousness rather than being about breathing. And it is very important to note that because the level of consciousness is what separates us from animals, quite frankly. And if you understand life as consciousness, then you will really get the best out of this book. And to be honest, nobody understands how consciousness works, right? It is so profound that defines a lot of things. You will see today, we're talking about artificial intelligence, but the difficulty is really, is it conscious? The consciousness, the manufacturing of consciousness is very, very tricky. And it is not as if the brain creates consciousness. It is not. Of course, I'm not claiming to be an expert or know much about consciousness, but nobody knows. But the brain is really the tool or the computer that is able to download consciousness. And what we are able to download as human, it's a superior level of consciousness. And that really defines the reality that we live based on our consciousness. It's very, very, very important. Here too, it talks a little bit about quantum mechanics. I mean, quantum physics it's complicated, and again, I will not claim that I understand it fully, but there is a basic understanding based on the double slit experiment. And this experiment shows that an electron is able to go through two slits or one slits or none when it is not observed. Once you put an observation, I would say, once you put consciousness into play, the electron behaves like matter. It creates that reality only because there was an observer that defined that reality. It's almost as if this is consciousness is the creative process by which we materialize our reality. And here, God breathed through the nostrils, and this is taken literally because, of course, people just associated breathing to life, but it is much deeper than that. It is more about the consciousness than just the breathing. We'll keep that in mind, and you will see that it ties into something else when you go to chapter 2, verse 8, I'll say verse 9, and it says, "And out of the ground made the Lord God to grow every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food." Listen now. "The tree of life also in the midst of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil." I thought about this a lot, and when I got it, it was just like it's clicked. We often cling to the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, but there is another tree that was planted, and it was the tree of life. Now, if we go back to understanding life, breathing life into the nostrils of the man and it became a living soul, it was consciousness. And you can trace that a tree of life will be a tree that can produce life. What is life? It's consciousness. There are so many trees that are able to alter our consciousness. In every culture, in every part of the world, there are trees, there are plants that are able to do that. For instance, weed. And the effect of that, I'll say weed because that is what is common. And by the way, in North America, pretty much where we are, it is legal. And the experience of that, if you are in line, you are very specific about how you go with this, is an experience of unity or unifying. And it means that when God put that tree in there, the possibility to alter our consciousness, not to a dumb level, but to elevate it. People who have gone on trips like the ayahuasca in the Amazon, all those cultures in our tribes in Africa, everywhere in Africa. And then I'll go just back then to have an Afrocentric view of this. It is that in every tribe, in every culture, there are plants, there are medicinal plants that the elders only knew what it was, and they were able to heal, they were able to alter the level of consciousness. And then, for some reason, it was illegal for many, many years until the system, I guess, gets the benefit of it. So you have, when people battle about weed being something bad or good, it's really misinformation, because the presence of that is of the consummation of weed or and other substances that are able to alter consciousness is very key to having that experience of unity and unifying, which is actually an antidote to the knowledge of good and bad. And this is something also that I thought about. Why did God put a tree of knowledge of good and bad, knowing well that when you put that temptation around there, someone is going to touch that? Then you have to remember that God has said, when we read chapter 1, God said that, let make man in our image. And you will agree that God knows what is good and bad, but everything that he has done for us so far is good. We have not been introduced to bad. So it is I would say it's a loving provision to have the possibility of bad, because you don't really appreciate good if you don't know what is bad. But did we have to go through the whole bad? Was it fair? Would it be fair if God withheld that possibility from us? How are we created then in the image of God if we don't have the possibility to access that bad and good and bad? And really, good and bad, it is definitive, and only God can get to that position where he says this is good, this is bad, because it's very subjective. It can be subjective. I know there are absolute bads and goods, but something that is good for someone may be bad for someone else. And you will agree with me that something like the Holocaust is a tragedy, and no one should be allowed to do things like that. But at that point, those who were perpetrating that kind of behavior were not doing something that is bad in their eyes. It was good in their eyes. It was bad for the people who were on the receiving end of that very action. So good and bad is really relevant. It's a spectrum, and we can really replace it by worst and best. So we can do our best, but we know that there can be a worst. And this is really key in knowing, because this very knowledge is a knowledge that introduces you to the possibility of being better than someone or being worse than someone. It is there. But the antidote to that possibility, and you can even say that the capitalism is a process by which the best on the market is produced for those who put in the effort to do that, right? And can even link that to the scientific method that has trials as to what has to be true or false. And the antidote to that is a more unifying process, which requires a higher level of consciousness. So I would say, and it's not just to say it because it has to be said. One path to finding solutions to some of the illnesses that we face in our society is to elevate our consciousness. And we can elevate our consciousness in different ways. And one of those ways is to access to those practices and secrets that our ancestors had, and that has been wiped out of the surface of our continent on purpose or by accident, so that we cannot be able to access that higher level of consciousness. And by the way, it is illegal. You remember in the 60s with the hippies, these people were just consuming whatever just could come their way. But it was a danger to the establishment, because then people were questioning what was there. And I bet that in many countries, I mean, and this is really a something borrowed from other places, that these substances are banned. Rightly so, because if it is consumed in a way that is not controlled, that is not appropriate, then it creates chaos in society. There was this guy, and I came across this today. There was this guy who devoted his life and read the original Bible scrolls, and he concluded after 14 years that he devoted to reading and translating these original texts. And he came up and said, you know what? The whole thing, Christ, actually comes from an ancient name that described a mushroom. And this mushroom had the possibility of taking people on a trip of their lives where they experience a transcendental dimension to what is common at that point. And you can see that, and he attributed religion as a way of these ancestors to code this information, this access to higher levels of consciousness into these writings, so that the enemy will not really get to it. But this knowledge is all over the world. There is no way, there is nowhere in the world where you don't see that there is a ban on these substances. For better, for worse, we cannot judge that. But it is important to know, and it is important to link consciousness now to life, because we can see that one of the paths to addressing some of these issues is to access a higher level of consciousness. And how do you do that? That is another question. But you can see that this is packed right there, where the tree of life, that is there, along with the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. And I said this in a way that we can take the spiritual, I would say, what has been revealed is that the improvement of our consciousness is a spiritual method. The improvement of worst or to best is a scientific method. And it has its utility, but it is there. And you will not see it as such, but it is right in front of our eyes. Now, we go back all the way back, and I'll say there were, the names of the Garden of Eden. Now, that's really important. And the Lord God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. I thought about this too. God had created everywhere and has given a purpose to a man to take care of this habitat that he has created. But he created a Garden of Eden somewhere. The jury's out as to where it is exactly on the map, but take this as a symbolism. And maybe this is home. A purpose is really actionable when it is localized, when you have a starting point. It is vague to just give someone a purpose without a starting point. And the starting point is really close to home. It starts individually. It is and this is where also, in an Afrocentric way of looking, it is very dangerous to give the keys to of responsibility to someone who claims to being able to do such or such, where their own home is on fire, right? And We see this a lot with, that's where you feel like democracy is, as they say, it's the worst form of government, and except none of the others work. The thing is that when you look at the fact that God has placed Adam in a garden at a starting point, it means that you have to localize your purpose and you have to start very proximal. You cannot go out there, and you beware of someone who claims that they want to change the world, whereas their own world is in shambles. And you will see many of those right now. And I'll say many of the politicians and many of people of power, you look at their families, you look at their own lives, things are starting to, and they claim all this. I don't claim that I'm perfect. I have my own trespassing in the past and things, but I think the exercise of starting to work on myself and forgiving myself for being able to elevate my level of consciousness has helped me a lot. And I am not doing this to change the world. I am doing this for myself so that I can recollect all these revelation, these understanding that I am getting from these scriptures, and put this in the context. So to go back, God created a garden of Eden and put the man there. And he did not make it rain until man was able to be there. So you understand that you have to start somewhere. Now, there is another thing that was really interesting. In verse 19, where it says here, and out of the ground the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. What was really interesting for me, and it's a very, very minor detail, it's like animals came from the ground. Now, if you go back on verse 7, and the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground. You see, there is a minor difference. Man was formed from the dust of the ground. Animals were formed from the ground. And this is why I said there is a link in evolution here, because it seemed like the Bible was talking about the evolution, and many, I would say, modern understanding of how things went will match this. And this is a detail that most religious leaders fail to understand. Man was formed from the dust of the ground. Animals were formed from the ground. You can actually infer that man was formed from a refined material compared to the animal, but the base is the same. The material is the same, but the dust is almost, if you kind of, how do you call it in English? Tamize. I can't find the word, but when you kind of put the ground that you formed, and make it in smaller and finer elements, that is the element that God used. It is not as if just God sat there, took some land, some ground, and started forming man, and then that's the story that we are being told. But it seems like man came from animals, so to speak, in a sense that it is the same material. And you can see that certain animals, our genetic material is not far from them. We are really, really close. It's not just animals, even plants. It is said that mushrooms, for example, we are closer to mushrooms than how mushrooms are closer to, I would say, to spinach, to green leaf. We are closer to them. And that is another thing, like about life, and especially mushrooms. There is a whole story about that. And you can see that thread starting to come. That is the tree of life that we mentioned there. And when you see this, you see that there is a line, there is a plausible and spiritual understanding of men coming from animals as a creative process. Men are created from the dust of the ground, and animals are created from the ground. We may have come from the ground, but what happened? There was a genetic intervention from God to change that. It was from the ground that took the dust, the most refined animal that was there is what God used to form a man. Once you understand that, it is easier to see the link that evolution is not far-fetched, and you have to take it seriously, because in your own Bible, this is the King James, I don't know if it's the same distinction in other Bibles. You look it up. In chapter 2 verse 7, it says, and the Lord formed man from the dust of the ground. And on verse 19 it says, and the Lord formed animals from the ground. There is a distinction now. And if you even go a little bit, if push it a little bit further, in the making of the woman, now a man is formed. And see, it says now at 20:21, and the Lord God gave a deep sleep to fall, caused a deep sleep to fall upon Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh instead thereof. And the rib which the Lord God had taken from man made a woman and brought her unto the man. This is crucial. You see now, it is not, you have to take this with symbolism that befits it. Now you see, if you have to look at the evolution or the evolution process, now the woman is made from a refined material that is taken from the man. This is evolution, and you can infer that, and I know I will get some slack about this, that women are built differently, and they have different intuitions as to how they perceived things. We are from the ground, and we can just rough it up. That's why men build the environment, because they are closer to the environment. That's why there is a difference between men and women. We are interested in different things. Women are more interested in people. Men are more interested in things. Men have built the infrastructure of any major society. It has been like that for ages. And it has been like that because it was made like that. We were made from the dust of the ground, closer to the animals. And now there is a refined, and you can even say a tougher material, because now it's not just the ground, it's now the bone. It is a much harder material that is being used to make a woman. And you can say that maybe women have it rough. The responsibility is very, very difficult, I think, daunting. And we tend to minimize it because we don't understand these scriptures. We give them meanings that fit us or fit a certain narrative um, for a certain agenda. But you can see here that if you look at the evolution of this creation process as far as living creatures um, or animal creatures are concerned, there is an evolution there. And I will say that, you see, um, God brought the woman to Adam to see what it will say. And Adam said, "This is the bone of my bones and the flesh of my flesh." And the other thing is, like, it's not every part of the body or the bones that was taken. It was a rib. Why a rib? I was just, why a rib? It could be like, why not a femur? Why not a something else, or the cranium, or something, you know, that is solid, or something like that? If you look now at what the rib cage protects, it is our vital organs, really, our heart. It's the center of our motivations. Of course, it comes from um, the brain, but really how we express it, how we have it in our language, it's like someone has a good heart or bad heart. This is where the rib is what protects it, our intention, our motivations. And you can see now that it it gives you a glimpse as to the role that the woman has to play in the purpose of the man. It is that protective power of the purpose that God has given to a man. That's what it means for the woman to come off of the rib of a man. And it's not, sometimes I've heard these jokes. Oh, who performed the first open heart surgery? Oh, it was God, because he took the rib off and made a woman out of that. That's not. That doesn't mean anything. It means nothing. There is an order in the universe as to how the environment is dealt with. And that order is that the man is at the forefront to take that roughness of the environment, and the woman is more of a spiritual protection for what is driving, what is motivating a man. And all of a sudden, what drops here is like, see, when Adam sees the woman, and it goes, "Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh." Now, this is like, I was like, it's like it's just parachuted there. They are introducing notions that have nothing to do with the story we are reading. They're talking about parents now. Nobody's talking about parents. They haven't had any kids. But all of a sudden, it just, to me, it seems like it's one of those things that were added for a certain purpose. Therefore, a man should leave the, and you can see this being repeated. Because I will say one thing, um, and the purpose was, I think the agenda is about the same way it is made for a sophistication of monotheism. It is the same agenda that makes the sophistication of monogamy. I mean, it is something to strive for, but monogamy is, I will say, a luxury that not everyone can afford. And I will bring it back to an Afrocentric view of things. And that is what we what has happened throughout slavery and what is happening in Africa and what is being preached for our system to become. When the slave left Africa and went to this land, they were never monogamous. They had a different way of living. And I believe that because it was such a very young civilization, that was acceptable. And as people are more sophisticated, as you single out your purpose, then you can afford just one protector of that. And monogamy also is a very tough and rough thing on 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 any woman, I believe. I think it's the ideal, but it's very difficult to achieve that, especially when you haven't figured out your purpose. Um, and I will let you in on a conversation I had with my partner today, actually. And was it today? No, yesterday. We're talking about someone who had an incident, and um, they, this is how it went. My partner felt like a woman saying no to a man in a very strict way, and I'd say it's enough for you to back off. And my claim was like, we're not built like that. Any man will approach us. Now, the example is like when I get approached by a man in the street or whatever, I say politely first, no, I'm not interested. And then if the person insists, then I will go and be rude. I will be rude. And it came to me that actually, yes, um, there was a time I would be pleased, and everybody really is pleased to hear that their partner, their woman, has turned down um, potential suitors, and we get angry that people will even think about asking our partners out. But if you look at it with a perspective of purpose, and my point was that, okay, you turning down someone because you are with me, it's not necessarily something that I will appreciate. It's really not, it doesn't empower me in any way, because if I'm not there, then it is something else, someone else. But if you were to, and on top of that, there's no being rude about it, it's just another story. Instead of that, when a man approaches you as a woman, and this is really something that I think everybody should think of and adopt as a woman, especially if a black man comes to you. We are built differently. We hunters. Now they come to you and say whatever they want. They have an idea of what they want. You know, women pick up on this. Instead of just being rude or after their assistance, it's better to say, okay, yeah, uh, what is your intent in pursuing me? And what is happening is that I am with someone that has a purpose, and my purpose is aligned with what this individual, this gentleman, has as a purpose. What is your purpose? If you ask a man, what is their purpose? It is a loaded question. They will leave you alone with respect. They will leave you alone without even bothering. They will appreciate that you made them think about what is their purpose. And there will be no need to be rude at all. Of course, there are outliers who would actually know that this woman is protecting someone's purpose, and they will still go for that woman. That's when you see that it is outside of what should be. And that, my friend, is what we will look at in chapter 3. Because chapter 3, now, after this creative, everything is created, it start introducing other elements. So really, really, we can talk about this for a long time. And I believe that for a short chapter like this, and to have taken us like more than 45 minutes in a monologue without a conversation is a testament to the richness of this particular chapter or of this book and what we can glean from it in an Afrocentric way. And that can empower us, and that can help us to change the way we do and we understand things, we operate. It will change the way we interact with each other. It will change the way we see our own purpose. It will change the way we see the place of everyone, of the woman. You know, in ancient Africa, a woman was at the center of everything because they are the one who protects, not in a combative way. You see in the Hollywood, they're putting in movies about the woman warrior, something like that. There's no society that has been, I'll say, transcendent because it is famous for its women warriors. There's no. You can actually say that most men can wrap up most women. Certain women can wrap up a few men, but they will find their match. And really understanding that these things are right there, and not in a condescending way, but appreciating the sophistication of a woman, their place in our purpose, is a much richer place to be and a way better way to operate in this reality, and to have a level of consciousness that keeps on increasing. We see that, you know, it is useful to look at these traditions that were kept and why are they being destroyed. Um, I don't know if it is appropriate to say this, but in the Democratic Republic of Congo, there was a war in 1996. And one of the elements about that war is that all of a sudden, a lot of these traditional kings were killed, and they were targeted. And you would wonder, why so many of them? These are the creme de la creme of our society. Why will they be targeted? Because it seems apparently that there was no need for them. But I think it is more because they were the guardian of these traditions and this knowledge that will allow us to go back and remember. Because it's just these things, we don't need to be taught who we are. We know these things. The information is within us. There is another element that we never talked about, and which is like the DNA is the storage material component. It just stores information, right? I heard somewhere that a gram of DNA is able to store more than 17 or 70 terabytes worth of information. And our entire body is able to store up to 13.8 billion light years of information. And coincidentally enough, that is the age of the universe. We have all the information we need within us. We just don't know. We don't have the life or uh, the, the consciousness, the level of consciousness to access that information. is what we're missing. And what is happening in Africa. And when you see a lot of wars and misquiet or disquiet that are happening, is to make sure that people don't have that quiet time to start questioning things, to live, to elevate their consciousness. Because when you are in a state of survival day after day, you're like an animal. Many people don't know what they will eat. They don't have shelter. They don't, many women are being raped because there's no sophistication to regulate aggression and sexual misconduct of the animal instinct that is within all of us, because we come from the same material, be it refined or not, but this is the case. So we really have to understand that when these things are being removed from our culture is a way of preventing us from accessing a higher level of consciousness. That's why these people who meditate a lot, or the Tibetans and things, they can reach those levels of consciousness without necessarily using hallucinogenics or substances that are altering their level of consciousness. And we don't have that in our continent, because except for a few who have their kids abroad, who have their investments somewhere else, everybody else is struggling, including us. When we come to North America, it's not like we live luxury. Everybody will tell you that they're living paycheck to paycheck. Why? And the majority of us is in our race. Why? There is something that is being prevented so that we don't access that level of consciousness that will allow us to question these things and say, wait a minute, these things were there. These are codes that were supposed to make us remember who we were. And that is what we will keep on doing. And hopefully this has been able to give you a different perspective on these scriptures, and this chapter especially. Chapter 2 is very, very powerful, very important. And with that, I'll leave you until Monday. Monday we'll go through chapter 3. Now we have different notions that are being introduced in this chapter, and we will just dissect them together as we always do. Until then, you be peaceful, you be prosperous, and without shame, I will plug our next week. We have on Thursday at 2 p.m. our seminar on really addressing the wealth gap between us, people of African descent, and other racial groups in North America. The link to the event will be posted on just underneath. Feel free to drop in, and we can share that information together.